All right, well, hello everyone, and thank you for joining us today to discuss the latest developments in satellite direct-to-device, or D2D. For those who might not be too familiar, it has been possible to provide connectivity from space to specialized handsets with bulky antennas for decades, using a portion of radio waves cleared to provide what is known as mobile satellite services, or MSS. But now, thanks to technological advances and evolving telecom network standards that are integrating satellites for the first time, it has become possible to connect standard smartphones and other mass market devices from space with a much smaller form factor. MSS operator Globalstar has been enabling space-based SOS services since late 2022 on the latest iPhones, thanks to its close relationship with Apple. Other D2D players are seeking to go far beyond SOS. Including texting, voice, and ultimately data services. Iridium Communications, represented on this panel today by Regulatory Vice President Kara Lieben-Azakar, is an MSS operator and, like Globalstar, already has a constellation in place for D2D services and is waiting for new standardized chips to come out to serve this market on the ground. However, there are multiple ways to approach this emerging industry, and each strategy has its pros and cons. Another way involves using radio waves from a mobile network operator partner, which enables satellites to reach devices that are already in consumer pockets because they're already using frequencies with land-based cell towers. This approach requires new technology in space, and companies like Link Global have plans for thousands of satellites to provide ubiquitous connectivity. We're delighted to have Margot Deckert here with us, Link's co-founder and chief operating officer, to discuss this side of the market. We also have George G. Zoglo, vice president for strategy at Omnispace, which has MSS spectrum rights and is working on ordering its proposed constellation. And last but not least, Jaume Sampere, founder and CEO of Sateliot, which is raising money for a constellation for connecting Internet of Things devices that could later reach smartphones. Thank you all for joining us. We only have about 45 minutes today, and we will be dedicating time toward the end of this webinar for questions from the audience. If you have any, please add them to the Q&A window on Zoom in advance, and we'll get to them a little later. So Margot, let's start the discussion with you. There are unique challenges for all the various D2D strategies out there. One that often comes up for a company like Link, that is essentially repurposing terrestrial radio waves for use from space, is regulation and navigating new rules that must be put in place to guard against the possibility of interference. The Federal Communications Commission is taking the lead on this and recently issued ground rules for what it calls supplemental coverage from space, or SCS. Not long ago, the conventional wisdom was that direct-to-smartphone services were impossible, yet now FCC has passed a historic rulemaking to shape this sector. How did we get here? Why did this happen, and what has changed?
Thank you so much, Jason, and to the audience for their time. So Link really kicked this party off. So we have been in conversation with the FCC since 2018. We had our first license in 2019. And we've kind of taken a crawl, walk, run approach. Where we've ended up today is with 5 commercial satellites operating in space. And over our history in having this conversation with not only the FCC, but regulators around the world, we've found that regulators have totally embraced the life-saving and life-changing opportunity that using terrestrial spectrum from space enables. Because of course, it's that phone that is already in everybody's pocket today. It's not a new chipset that has to be put into handsets, and then the handsets have to propagate throughout the market. And so really, we're seeing regulators employ different strategies. So Palau was actually the first country on the planet to deploy this service commercially with Link. And their regulator took a very flexible approach to using spectrum. If the MNO wants to use their spectrum from satellite, they have permission to do that. Here, the FCC is taking a flexible, fast approach, but they really need to protect the incumbent spectrum holders, and they need to make sure they have accountability. And that's where we see the SCS rules. One, it's that you have to have a leasing agreement with a satellite provider. That's the accountability portion. And in order to protect incumbent spectrum holders, you have to have CONUS-wide spectrum in order to get a license without a waiver. And that's kind of how we've ended up today. And it's very exciting to see where the industry and where regulators are at.
Yeah, and Cara, from the MSS side, how will Iridium address this 3D multidimensional spectrum chess game that is now unfolding for D2D?
Yeah, and Iridium has thank you, Jason. And Iridium has taken a different approach than Link or other supplemental coverage from space solutions. So it's hard on these webinars because you can't see the audience. It's hard to know who's there and what they know. So just take a step back like Margot did, which I think was such a great brief introduction to her company. Iridium has been in service for 25 years, providing MSS services, a variety of different, there are handsets. We operate through a partnership network for IoT devices and different types of routers that end users can use. We have 66 low Earth orbit satellites. We cover the entire globe. Non-geostationary, we operate within a small amount of spectrum, 9 megahertz, just under 9 megahertz. And so for us, it's really about using the assets that we already have for this new product that we see, potential product line. So we started with a proprietary approach where we had an agreement with Qualcomm, and that didn't ultimately make its way into handsets. And we pivoted to a standards-based solution, which we're calling Project Stardust. So Iridium has always taken the position with direct-to-device that it would operate within the confines of its existing spectrum and its existing license so that it can bring to this potential product line the same thing that it has brought to all of the others, which is a unique perspective and a reliable, experienced operator. And that's the same thing we're doing here. So we're working through 3GPP to get certain, and this is where I'm a regulatory attorney, not an engineer, but in sort of layman speak, some certain technical parameters in our waveform into the release 19, and that will get into chipsets for IoT devices. And then it will also have some messaging and SOS capabilities. So it's going to take a couple years to get to that point. And then once we get to that point, we'll have agreements with MNOs, which is a little bit similar to what Margot is describing with respect to the FCC's model. But ours will be different because rather than under the SCS model, the satellite operator roaming on a wireless terrestrial network, actually the wireless terrestrial operator will have its customers provisioned to roam on our network when it's outside the bounds of the terrestrial network for that purpose. So yeah, that's how we're navigating it. We're actually sort of we have not had to amend licenses or change regulation in order to do what we're doing. And we think that is the best way to bring this to market using the, like I said, the assets and the experience that we have.
Very good. That's very clear. Thank you. George, Omnispace has been very vocal about concerns that SpaceX's plans to use T-Mobile cellular spectrum in the US could cause interference that would derail its proposed MSS constellation. Are you happy with the outcome at the FCC?
Yeah, absolutely, Jason. I mean, as we look at what the FCC is doing here, it's very important. The FCC is wanting to lead in this market space, which I think everybody agrees is a very important development for technology and for driving economic growth around the world. What we are encouraged is that the FCC has taken a very balanced approach to this. The original request here was for the use of this terrestrial spectrum on a co-primary basis, and the FCC's rules specify the potential use of this spectrum on a secondary basis, which means that if there is any interference to terrestrial or satellite networks, then the service needs to immediately cease. Omnispace has been, as you say, very, very vocal in this area. We've presented hundreds of pages of technical analysis to the FCC. We are convinced that there will be interference into our system in contravention of the ITU regulations for the international use of MSS spectrum at 2 gigahertz. And I mean, for the FCC to pursue this, I think it's important. I think over time, these regulations will be resolved, the technologies will be resolved, but it needs to be done in such a way where it's not going to cause interference or disruption to the majority of services that are out there. Yeah, the one other thing that I'll add is so Omnispace is a founding member of the MSSA, the Mobile Satellite Services Association, that is focused on the standards-based rollout of these direct-to-device solutions, along with our other founding partners from Viasat, Yahsat, TerreStar Solutions, and Ligado. In combination, we represent some 100 megahertz of MSS spectrum that is actually built into the standards currently and represented in REL 17 of the 3GPP standards. So this is spectrum that does not require any changes to regulations. It is completely licensed. As you look at the FCC's SCS proceeding rules, it's clear that applies to the use of terrestrial spectrum. It has no implications whatsoever for MSS. That is free and clear to provide these services in countries where licenses exist. So the MSSA is focused on the ecosystem development of this technology and making sure that the standards evolve in such a way that the solutions become more technically capable, more affordable to everybody around the world, and drive the economic solutions and the availability of these services.
And I know other regulators are watching the FCC closely to reform their own rules around the world. Jaume, what is your take on what is happening at the FCC from your perspective across the Atlantic in Spain, and how is your approach to this market different from the others here?
Our approach it's from another point of view. Okay, we started as an IoT connectivity provider. This means that the spectrum that we need is very few. You have to think that NB-IoT, which is the standard that Release 17 has taken to the non-terrestrial network, it requires 200 kilohertz. Okay, this means that with 1 megahertz we have 5 channels, which is a lot in IoT when we're talking about IoT devices. Then our approach is to have our own spectrum. We have applied an ITU, and now we are doing the banding rights in more than 60 countries in parallel. Why now we have already some of our main country objective approved. This means that we'll have our own frequency spectrum in order to operate for NB-IoT. Why direct to device? Because there is an evolution, okay, that seems to be clear with all the chipset manufacturers to include NB-IoT protocol inside the mobile phones. We believe that this is the right approach in order to have this text messaging, which is the first step in order to have connectivity everywhere with direct to device. This is the approach that SAT Elliott is taken everywhere in the world. It has been approved and validated by our technology with the 2 satellites that we have already launched, and with the 4 satellites that we are launching in some weeks with SpaceX.
Yeah, and of course, efforts to bring policy and law in line with all the innovation in D2D is not something that's just confined to the FCC in the US. International regulators recently updated global rules governing the use of radio waves. What was done at WRC 23 to help set the D2D market up to realize its full potential? And Margot and Cara, as the regulatory experts here, maybe you wanna jump on this one. Margot, I see you nodding your head.
Yeah. So I think from the beginning, Link really took the approach that we were going to go country by country, and that we were going to build a regulatory base and a consumer base, and then that would help inform a global framework. I think what you saw at WRC 23 and how they set up what they're going to examine at WRC 27 is a real recognition that the unconnected is actually growing. That divide is growing. And so you have to take steps now to address it. but there's still a desire to build that stable global framework for this industry to thrive on a long-term basis. So the WRC process is coming along just where I think we would like it to be as an industry. And I think that we'll be able to inform the final outcome by the real world implementation. What makes sense, what is handled by business arrangements rather than regulations. The fact that we can operate on a non-interference, non-protected basis, and that this is going to be really exciting, especially to the consumer. You know, we talk about consumer adoption, but you have to remember that Link was born from a mission, right? The mission that you have to be able to connect people who can only afford a $5 feature phone or a $14 smartphone, and that those people really can't afford to wait to engage the global economy in the time scale it's going to take to put a chipset into our handsets. And I think WRC recognizes that, and they've heard what the world community is said, and they're going to take it up more fully at WRC 27.
And I don't have much to add on that point. Iridium's still developing its WRC 27 agenda strategy, so I can't really speak to that at this time. But one point that I don't know that I made well in my first piece that Margot touched on that is important to note is that Link is going country by country, and there's other notes of country by country regulatory changes. For Iridium solution, we don't need that, and we don't necessarily need changes at WRC in order to do what we're doing with Project Stardust. It's really about 3GPP and enabling that technology in future handsets. So from a regulatory perspective, from an advocacy perspective, we just haven't been involved in those conversations. It's really mostly about tracking what's happening. But again, we're still working on our 27 agenda strategy.
And another significant dividing line for this emerging market that separates what we're seeing here, you know, there we have those building satellites from scratch versus companies able to leverage existing orbital assets like Iridium. I think through a software update that's ongoing at the moment. George, what is Omnispace planning to bring to the table with its own MSS constellation?
Yeah, so thanks for that question, Jason. So we have been working with satellite manufacturers for some time now to develop the architecture for the system that we are planning to procure later on this year into next year. It's public. We've worked with some very large primes on developing that architecture, and we're currently going through drilling down into the specific space and ground assets to provide this system. As you look at the most important part of this direct-to-device solution, accessing a cell phone, it is the most disadvantaged device. So as you look at providing cell phone communications, and we're focused on providing unlimited texting, voice, a reasonable amount of data into the device to enable email, simple web browsing, all of your apps will work. In order to get to that kind of capability into, again, this most disadvantaged device, the cell phone, you also are able to achieve a very high capability for IoT services. And for IoT, it spans a very large number of use cases. Connected vehicle is by far the single largest use case. It represents more than half of the IoT market opportunity in our analysis, but it also spans many other applications from remote environmental monitoring. Agriculture is a very large number of simple devices that require a very small amount of data. Utilities utilizing this service for metering, and oil and gas, and a very broad range of applications. So as this system rolls out, servicing all parts of the market, it will be capable of serving all of those needs.
Great. And Omnispace, I think, has plans for building 600 satellites. Are you finding it challenging to finance this in the current economic climate, or what's the plan there to fund these plans?
We're seeing a lot of interest from potential investors. Part of the driver of this is it is again a standards-based solution. So to the degree that handsets enter the market that are 5G handsets that are representing REL 17 and higher releases, those devices will be able to be brought onto the network simply by the mobile network operator changing the roaming table and allowing that device to roll to roam onto a satellite network. So as I've been working in the satellite industry for more than 3 decades now, part of the issue of satellite communications has always been the device. Who's going to install it? Who's going to maintain it? Where are you going to put it that's unobstructed? Here, the device is something that's sitting in everybody's pocket. Certainly, as you look at a 5G standard, it is something that's going to require a new phone. As these systems roll out and 5G becomes the standard technology for these devices, that will become less of an issue. As you look at existing legacy handsets, we are also looking at solutions that will allow those devices to work. It's actually not that complex, but what it will provide is a service that's not as capable as a standards-based 5G service with all of the applications that go along with that.
Okay, and another interesting development we saw recently, and George, you touched on this earlier, was the creation of the Mobile Satellite Services Association, or MSA, which is a non-profit group of MSS operators that have banded together to help foster collaboration for their approach and harmonize MSS for integrating with standardized devices. Omnispace is part of that group, but not Iridium. Cara, why is that? Is your strategy here vastly different from the rest?
Yeah, Iridium hasn't joined that group. We've talked to them. There is a difference between how Iridium operates and how the members of that group operate as well. We are NGSO, and most of those are geo satellite constellations. So there's just differences between the two groups, and we haven't come to a decision to join or not join, and we're still in conversations is the best way I could put it.
Thank you. And Margot, do you think it could make sense for something similar from D2D players seeking terrestrial partnerships around the world? Could you ever be a partner for SpaceX or AST Space Mobile in some way?
Well, first of all, Link's approach and the whole idea of being able to use terrestrial bands from space was really that there be no friction, no need for an industry association. We partner with mobile network operators. We plug into their network as a roaming provider. It's actually a seamless experience for their users. So there may not be a need for an industry association for sat to phone using terrestrial spectrum. Now, we'll play together in different spaces in different countries where both of us are deployed, but that's something that we can handle, those coordination efforts between companies and between our MNO partners.
All right, and then perhaps, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say I liked Margot's answer better than mine. Good job.
So more broadly, perhaps then, does everyone here see a future where different strategies for this market coexists? Or is there anyone who doesn't?
Oh, absolutely.
Sure, there will be different strategies, okay, coexisting from the incumbent operators that they have right now, the satellites, that they will try or they will succeed on moving to standards. But at the end, the standard market is so huge compared to the proprietary market that today they are operating in. I think that this will be a general move toward working with the standards. We have seen it in the IoT devices. Today there are around 4 million devices connected to all the satellite operators. We are becoming commercial by the end of this year, and before being commercial, we have already succeeded to signing 7 million devices to be connected. This means that, and this is just a small part of the whole market that is out there. Then I really believe that the standard will change everything. The the ARPU, of course, will change completely. Okay, we're not talking about 15 or 20 euros ARPU. We're talking about 2, 3, 4 euros per device, which means that you need a super efficient approach to the market, and that's the way we have always seen that we have to go there. Okay, that we invented the store and forward, that now will be on the release 18 and 19, and we patented our satellites. This means that we can start working with very few satellites for these non-time sensitive applications from day one, and increasing the number of satellites and increasing the number of use cases that they are covered with our infrastructure.
So, Margot, I think you're about to agree that there is room for everyone here.
Yes, I think, it's the world's appetite for communications, shared communications, resilient communications when natural disaster strikes, it's only growing. So there's going to be more than one player in a market. For example, both SpaceX and Link have partnered with Rogers in Canada. There's going to be countries like New Zealand where every operator, has a satellite partner. There's going to be like the Omnispace solution. There may even still be the traditional, like car represents, where you have to have a specialized device, specialized subscription. And as they wade into the market with their Project Stardust, there's going to be multiple players. It's well over a 300 billion total addressable market per year. And when you see companies like a SpaceX jump in with both feet, those kind of fast followers, you realize the market potential is huge. And you realize that in our case, where we have to partner with mobile network operators, we don't have spectrum. They have the spectrum and the customers, that they don't allow for monopolies. They like to have choice, just like they did with the operating system. They're going to want choice in their satellite providers. So it's going to be a healthy market. There's going to be a healthy choice for MNOs and a healthy choice for consumers. And at the end of the day, it's all about quality of service for that consumer, right?
We see it similarly. I think it comes back to your question about MSSA and Margot's response to it, which I thought was absolutely fantastic. There are different approaches in the market, and we see ourselves differently right now than what MSSA is putting forward at this time. And so it's not something that we would be currently, we're considering, but not currently joining. And it's the same thing with all the different approaches to a direct-to-device solution. Project Stardust is going to be in off-the-shelf products at some point in the next couple of years, about 2 years out. And then it will be up to MNOs that we partner with for those roaming agreements if they're turned on. We, like Margot mentioned, we think our history of reliable service and our global approach to it, not a regional approach, makes our product the best one that will come to the market in the future. But there will be these multiple approaches that either look like the FCC's supplemental coverage from space type solution or an MSS type solution, and there might be more out there that we're not aware of at this time as well. And that's innovation, which we think is good for the consumer, good for the market, and good for all of our businesses.
So one thing I'd like to add, if I may. I think we all see this as a very large market opportunity, and there's certainly plenty of space here for different approaches to the market. But one thing that I just want to throw out there is not all spectrum is created equally. As you look at areas that are far away from cellular use of spectrum in the oceans, in very remote areas, that's very clearly an opportunity to reuse terrestrial spectrum. From our market analysis, some 45 to 70% of the market opportunity, and that varies depending on the country and the use case, is actually urban adjacent. So as we've all seen this situation, as you're driving away from a city and you lose cell phone connectivity, to have a service that seamlessly connects into a non-terrestrial network is what this needs to be, to operate in frequencies that require exclusion zones. To maintain the integrity and avoid interference into those terrestrial networks means that you're not going to be able to serve those users that are urban adjacent. I've spoken with a lot of mobile network operators. They've all voiced concerns about potential interference. They've all been sort of posed with this question about whether it's possible to move spectrum away from the edges of their networks to reallocate to satellite, and I haven't heard anybody in favor of that. So as these things roll out through the FCC, through the ITU, we're going to see how these market opportunities play out. But what is absolutely clear is, for internationally licensed MSS spectrum, those issues don't exist.
Thank you, George. And yeah, so go ahead.
Jason, if I might kind of weigh in on what George said. So, Link has been testing this technology since, 2020. And we have done thousands of tests around the globe over some of the largest, most populated cities: Washington, D.C., London, very heavily populated cities in Asia Pac. And we have been able to handle doing these tests without any interference to the terrestrial networks. You can handle deployments of spectrum in order to address co-channel interference, address deployment, whether it's overlapped or the spectrum is separated geospatially. So, people continue to raise this concern, but I think the FCC would not have been able to jump into SCS if they had not had that body of data that Link provided, that we have been able to conduct these tests from space using terrestrial frequencies without impacting terrestrial networks.
But also, to be clear, the request was for a co-primary allocation, and what was given was a secondary allocation, which must be turned off if there is interference. So it's not clear that situation doesn't exist.
Absolutely, George, and that's what we advocated for at Link, because we have partnered with MNOs. So it's their, spectrum and customer base, which makes our system work. So we agree that it's on a secondary allocation.
One quick thing that I'll just add, it's one thing for me to suggest that there's exclusion zones. It's another thing for SpaceX to recognize it. As you look at their submissions to the FCC in the use of the PCSG block, they show a 1 to 200 kilometer exclusion zones around the northern and southern borders of the US, because T-Mobile does not have rights to use that spectrum in Canada or Mexico. So there's clearly an issue that exists there.
I will agree with George that not all spectrum is equal. So Link uses sub 1 gigahertz, and that's because we find it propagates very well and that we can handle these coordination issues.
Thank you for that. And we're going to check for audience questions very soon, but does anyone else have any views on how the market potential is perhaps different for MSS versus the terrestrial radio wave route? You want to weigh into this? I'm steering clear. Okay, Jeff, how are we looking for questions?
Thanks, Jason. We've got plenty of questions coming in. I'll start off with a combination of a couple of questions coming in based on everyone's favorite mega constellation, Starlink. And the question for the panel is, how do you see SpaceX Starlink as a competitor in this market? How does your solution have a competitive edge based on price or quality or other attributes?
So I think, yeah, at SpaceX are talking about enabling text services sometime this year with regulatory permission, and then voice and data not coming pretty soon after that. So who would like to take that one? Cara?
Sure, I'll give my 2 cents. So they still need, so the FCC's rules created a framework. They still need to get grant of the license to actually bring that to market. I'll say that part. And then it's going to take us longer. I already mentioned about 2 years to get the chipsets in devices to go through the 3GPP process. I think that the difference is really the global nature of Project Stardust of Iridium service, the spectrum that George already mentioned. We have L-band spectrum, which is weather resilient. It is also global, works over oceans, and we don't have to go sort of country by country. Wherever you have that off-the-shelf IoT device or the off-the-shelf handset that has the the standards-based chip in it, you would be able to use the Iridium direct-to-device solution. So that's where it differs, is the boundaries and then the type of spectrum being used.
I fully agree with Cara. Really, it will be I think that it will be more difficult than it seems to have an MNO allocating a spectrum to these third-party non-terrestrial networks, country by country. Okay, to use the MSS spectrum directly, okay, is the way to have something absolutely regular in all the different countries, and you could use it globally with fully standard devices.
Yeah, the only thing that I'd like to add is, as you look at SpaceX's use of T-Mobile spectrum in the US, that's clearly the first cab off the rank for this type of service. And it is 5 + 5 megahertz. And again, we've raised our concerns about the 1990 to 1995 portion of that spectrum being inside the international ITU allocation for the S-band. As you look at that service, firstly, that's not enough capacity, and that is the single national license that exists. All the other licenses are regionally based and are going to be subject to coordination with different owners. And then as you get to border issues, it becomes even more complex with the use of this terrestrial spectrum. So SpaceX is obviously an extremely capable, a very forward-leaning company. We need to watch what they're doing very carefully. And this is I actually I like SpaceX. I've launched a lot of satellites on Falcon 9. The Starlink service is obviously incredible. As you look at this service, they are certainly setting the benchmark for pace in terms of how quickly we need to roll out this service, and I think that they exist there as a forward-leaning company that we all need to watch very closely.
Any more, Jeff?
Yeah, another question comes up of the issue of the business case for direct-to-device. How do satellite operators see themselves making money from direct-to-device? Who pays and how much?
I can start out on that if you'd like. So we've done a lot of work on the market sizing here. We're able to close the business case quite easily, based essentially on terrestrial ARPU pricing in the markets that we're looking to serve. So what that means is that for a user who moves out of terrestrial coverage, we're actually able to close the business case on what they would be paying for terrestrial connectivity, except from a non-terrestrial connected location. So as you talk with M&Os, it's not just the revenue upside. There is also a cost saving element here. As you look at the cost of those edge networks, in some cases they're not very economic. In some cases, governments are actually subsidizing the rollout of terrestrial networks in order to expand the percentage of population served. So there are different economic elements in play here. Certainly a subscriber paying for the service, but also the use of universal service obligation funds and other mechanisms in order to expand the coverage of mobile networks.
Margot, Link has already started early commercial services in a handful of island countries. What can you say about the revenues there and how that ramps up as you add more satellites and capabilities? What's the rough roadmap?
So one of the things that when you do sat to phone and you use terrestrial spectrum that you do for your MNO partners, you allow them to monetize spectrum they could not otherwise afford to monetize. They either can't afford the CapEx and OpEx on building a terrestrial tower, the population just isn't there to build that tower, and you also provide them network resiliency. And George was spot on, but I will also add our MNO partners are very concerned about churn, about losing subscribers to another provider that really has ubiquitous, affordable coverage. And it kind of depends on the geography for the MNO. You know, if you have what we call like the concierge user, you know, they may not see an uptick in their price plan for their MNO. If you're the MNO who is now providing service in a part of Central African Republic or Liberia where you didn't offer service before, you're going to offer that, you know, plan as if people for the first time could get connectivity in the place where they live and work. And so we're very excited about what this means for our MNO partner. And yes, over time, you know, areas, it's a lot of fun. Some of our initial markets, these people have coverage for the first time in their lives. And so they're getting used to using the phones, they're using the service more and more, and it's really very exciting to connect them to the outside world using a mobile phone.
Did anyone else have anything to add on this question about where is the money coming from before we take the next question?
Sure, yeah, I can just, oh, go ahead, George.
No, Kara.
I'll jump in. Go ahead.
Okay. I'll
Yes,
just,
okay.
mine's pretty quick. I'm not a business person, but what I'll say from Iridium's perspective, we see this as a product in a portfolio of products rather than the product for our business. So that just changes the way we think about it from a finance perspective. We see it as a consumer can buy certain types of, a consumer end user or can buy certain types of Iridium services from a variety of different partners already. And this is just another product that's going to be sort of already in their hand. So it's just a different way of thinking of it.
And Jama?
What we are doing is drumming with the mobile operators. So then when we talk about having seamless connectivity, seamless includes price. Then we believe, okay, that the incremental price of being connected in places where there is no connectivity, which is just part of the time, and it's a small part of the market. It have to be absolutely in line with the prices inside the city. Then we are talking about ARPUs super low. In line with some countries, okay? In India, the ARPU of the mobile phone is less than €2 a month. Then I do not see any possibility there to selling some of these services for more than €1. Okay, we are talking a very low ARPU. Then you have to be very efficient on all the deployments, and I think that one key point here is what kind of services are you going to deploy? Okay, it's of course everybody wants full broadband or wideband connectivity everywhere, but are we able to provide it with LEO satellite constellation? LEO, as Kara has explained, okay, it means a lot of satellites that a lot of time they cover places where there is nobody. 60–70% of the time they are overseas, okay, where there are very few people, and you have to finance it when you fly over these places where there is people that needs connectivity and have nothing else. Then we see it as fully integrated with mobile operators. We are not invoicing final customers. We are invoicing these roaming agreements with MNOs, which are our partners, which already know the market and which have the capability of doing customer service, invoicing, and all these process at a very low price.
Thank you. I don't know if we said, but ARPU stands for average revenue per user. George, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, just very quickly, and to Joam's and Margot's point, one of my favorite examples, there was a study published by GSMA on Argentina and the coverage of the mobile networks in Argentina, and what GSMA have proved is that in order to get to the last 1% of population, it would take more capital investment than everything put into the first 99%, right? So those users are just never ever going to be served, and right now the coverage is only 93% of population, and to get to 94 is a big challenge for countries that have an objective of serving 100% of their population. This really is the only technology that's ever going to get there.
Very good, thank you. Jeff, anything else out there?
Yeah, another question. Has there been any sense that any lack of clarity regarding access to spectrum or regulations has impacted investments into these constellations? And perhaps do you see that changing now, for example, that the FCC supplementary coverage from space rules are in place?
Who would like to take that on?
I think that this is one of the challenges, of course, okay, as is technology, as is access to customers. Okay, I do not see is the main one challenge that blocks money going into the sector.
I would just add, Jason, that I think anytime for an investor, they see stability, they see regulatory engagement, that makes them happy, right? And so you have investors that are very forward-leaning in the beginning. So when you're innovative and a startup, they're willing to write the checks. But I think as the older, more established investors, they want to see a framework. And so the FCC taking this step to ensure U.S. leadership, I think, is a very positive one for not only our country and companies who use the FCC like Link does as our regulator, but on a global scale, you'll see the large regulators begin to also put forth frameworks and rules.
George?
As I mentioned before, we're seeing a lot of interest from investors. There is a very large market potential here. There's lots of questions around standards, around technology, around regulation, and around the market sizing and the economics. And we feel that we've retired all of those risks for our investors. There was a time a number of years ago where there was a question about whether you'd ever be able to close the link to a standard smartphone from space. And now you can go to an Apple store and buy an iPhone and you have a satellite phone, right? So we're seeing a lot of excitement from investors, and again, it is being driven by that very high potential ramp of services as the system becomes available on orbit. It really is a matter of getting to a roaming agreement with the MNO and having to change the roaming tables for their subscribers in order to be able to add millions of users onto this system.
Very good. Jeff, sounds like we've still got lots of questions. Oh, and I think you're muted.
Okay, we could probably keep going for another 45 minutes here, but try and combine a couple of questions here regarding relationships between satellite operators and mobile network operators in terms of partnerships and exclusivity and so on. Will direct-to-device satellite companies prioritize exclusivity when working with telco partners, or will telcos be able to work with multiple providers in a market to improve performance or coverage? And a related question to that, talking about Rogers working with both SpaceX and Link, do you anticipate in the future mobile network operators being able to set up systems where users can seamlessly between different satellite operators just to provide the best service possible?
Well, I will say that Link absolutely envisions that MNOs will partner with multiple satellite providers, as well as one satellite provider will partner with multiple MNOs in country. In fact, I think I may have mentioned that one of the countries that we're in commercial service with is New Zealand, and we partnered with two of the MNOs there, Spark and 2 Degrees. So that's what the world of possibility is going to be. Whether or not a satellite provider does exclusives, that's up to the satellite provider. That's not what Link does. And so, we're all about getting the service into people's hands as fast as possible, and envision all sorts of partnership structures, which the FCC recognized in the SCS.
Neither do we. In each country, we have more than MNO, okay, that is working with their own customers. Since we use our own spectrum, we don't have any tie to the MNOs in order to have exclusivity with them.
Yeah, from an Omnispace perspective, we work with MNOs that have also signed agreements with other satellite D2D providers. I think MNOs should continue to look out for what is the best technology, when it's going to be available, who has the best quality of service, who has capability that is accessible in all parts of their market. We've signed mobile network operator agreements with some 20 MNOs. We don't typically advertise them. I think MTN was the most recent one, which is obviously a very large and capable multi-country operator. I think with regard to exclusivity, I mean, quite frankly, from my perspective, I'd like this service to be accessible to as many users as possible. But having said that, exclusivity may be necessary in order to be able to access some markets. There's also a question about how the regulator looks at it, and wanting to constrain access in rural and remote areas to a single operator. I know there are some regulators that may have issues with that.
Thank you. Maybe before we take the next question, it might be helpful just to go through each of you for, I don't know, a best case scenario timeline for when you plan to launch full global D2D services and what those capabilities look like. Because Margot, Link is currently enabling, I think, intermittent texting services, but you plan to go far beyond that. What's the rough roadmap for you?
Well, this is what I'll say in terms of Link's roadmap. We're going as fast as we possibly can to reach those inflection points to provide service for our customers. So our next inflection point is seamless texting on a global scale, which we will reach next year. And then, as you've mentioned, we're on a roadmap to provide voice and broadband services. So Link is very excited about where we'll be in the coming months. And as we've already mentioned, we're in commercial service today.
And Cara, you mentioned, I think, a few years away from your launch. What do those services look like?
Yeah, so we've set a couple years, so 2026 realistically. The services we're focused on it as an IoT service, but we're also looking at messaging and SOS, which is something that's available on our devices today. So a similar type of SOS functionality as well, and some basic messaging sometime in 2026.
Very good. And Jama, you're also starting with IoT?
Yeah, we're starting IoT this year. This year we are going to have more than 10 satellites that will deliver global coverage everywhere in the world, up to 5 to 10 messages per day, which is a big part of the market, okay? Because IoT, it differentiates with direct-to-device, with mobile phones. There are a lot of applications that need few messages per day, which is the one that we are attacking right now, the one that we are directing right now. Okay, next year we're going to be around 1 hour visit time everywhere in the world, and this is the moment, okay, that we may have the capability of launching other services.
Very good. And George?
So from an Omnispace perspective, you mentioned filings at the FCC where we talked about a 600 satellite constellation. So that is a densified constellation. It is possible to get to global service with fewer than 600 satellites. So we are looking at a phased implementation. We have a number of satellites on orbit now that we're using to demonstrate capability with MNOs and with other partners. And we are looking at in the coming years phasing in that approach and moving very, very quickly to full coverage for, again, voice data services, not just texting, not just NB-IoT.
Very good. Okay, thank you for breaking that down, everyone. Jeff, I think we've got time for a few more questions.
Yeah, I'm going to combine a couple of questions here dealing with the performance provided by direct-to-device services. A lot of discussion about relatively low bandwidth services like messaging and voice and so on. Is that, all that's capable? Is that sufficient for direct-to-device companies? And one person in particular asking, what is the timeline for 4G quality broadband direct-to-device services?
Yeah, so if I could just jump in, so from an Omnispace perspective, clearly, as you look at outside of coverage services, and as I've said before, it's texting, it's voice, it's enough data in order to have your apps work for email, for web browsing, What I've often said is if you're expecting to stream Game of Thrones into the middle of the Sahara Desert, then you're going to be a little bit disappointed. That's really not recognized as a necessary service for this type of capability. So as you look at standards development, and again back to the MSSA for a moment, as we're looking at different channelizations, as we're looking at different capabilities that will be built into chipsets and devices, there is a way to actually get to more efficient capabilities that's going to deliver a more seamless service. We're already talking about how we can address video conferencing and video streaming on our future systems, and looking for ways to make that more accessible to more devices.
So Link can support voice calls today. We just don't do that in order to maximize the amount of traffic that can pass over our satellite constellation, as we are supplying only intermittent coverage. But we've had 2 MNO partners, 2 Degrees in New Zealand and Rogers in Canada, put online the voice calls that we've done with them. So the audience can go and hear for themselves that capability, and how exciting it is for people to be able to do voice calls in very remote areas where they could not before.
Jeff?
Yeah, we had a couple of questions earlier about Starlink, and now questions come in about another provider in the space, AST Space Mobile. The questioner's asking their panel's thoughts on what they're providing and how your services will match up against them.
If I may, I think the key differentiator is that AST is going direct to broadband. They haven't taken a crawl, walk, run approach. They've built very large satellites and deployed them in low Earth orbit, 1 to date, and that's the crux of their strategy. I think if you look to the other providers, we've kind of laid out an approach that grows over time to those broadband-like services.
So you're planning similar service to AST, but just over a longer timeline, Margaret?
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. You know, when we first got started, Link was the first company going around and talking to regulators, and this crawl, walk, run approach made a lot of sense to us and made a lot of sense to them. It's a way to get life-saving technology into the public sphere as fast as possible. And that's the approach that we thought made a lot of sense. But AST is going direct to broadband services first.
But just to be clear, so AST is looking to reuse terrestrial spectrum as well. I think the Blue Walker 3 is operating in the 700 or 900 megahertz band. I think similar to Link. So the challenge here is the same challenges that we've been talking about before with regard to SES. How quickly that spectrum is going to be made available through MNOs and resolving any issues that may exist cross borders and between operator usage. Also, the technology that's being there is AST is making their own satellites. They are very, very large, very complex satellites. And as you look at the cost and the schedule of that system, at least from my perspective, the costs continue to increase and the schedule continues to extend. On their SPAC offering, a number of years ago, they were supposed to have a full global constellation, full service availability at the end of last year, which obviously doesn't exist. That was supposed to be at 110 commercial satellites. So right now they have 0 commercial satellites. They have 1 test satellite, Blue Walker 3, and are planning to deploy another 5 satellites that were supposed to be launched in the 4th quarter of last year, and then the 1st quarter of this year, and then the 2nd quarter of this year. And I think they just announced the 3rd quarter of this year is when they're looking to deploy those. So the timelines continue to extend there. And in order to get to full global coverage, you need quite a few satellites. So we'll see how that network develops.
Yeah.
Joe. Okay. Sorry, Jason. I fully agree with Joe. I think that it's super difficult to build up and maintain such a constellation with the services that you have to deploy all around the world. Again, I think that it's a constellation that it fits perfectly on the needs of countries like US, where the average rate per user it's super high. Okay, but when you have to maintain it global constellation with those kind of incomes, it will become more and more challenging. We believe that the low cost services is the one that most of the unconnected people is looking for.
And I'll take the how we differ part of the question, which I think maybe I might sound like a broken record, so forgive me if I've said all of these things already, but I think it gets to what George said. So Iridium has an existing constellation with a current projected life of over 10 more years. We're not launching satellites for this purpose or launching new satellites anytime soon. So that's a difference between us and AST. The other difference are the boundaries, which George also mentioned. So theirs is a regional based approach using terrestrial spectrum, and ours is a global. We already have our global L-band spectrum that is that we hold and have licensed, and so we don't need to go through any particular regulatory body or licensing process in order to bring our solution to market.
And AST Space Mobile, they're building their satellites in-house and have faced some production issues in the past. Link also builds its satellites in-house, and you're going to have to build a great, vast number of them. What are your production facilities look like now? What are they capable of, and what are you planning to ramp to? How many satellites a day are you going to be churning out?
Well, Link is a growing company, and just as we're growing the number of satellites that we've deployed, we got to grow the number of satellites that we can manufacture per month, and we are going to do that. I think to speak to what Jamu said about the cost of services, Link, we build small satellites that are cost effective to build. And if you're building expensive satellites, you really can't deliver affordable coverage to somebody in Africa who makes $60 a month. So that is the difference. We build small satellites, they're cost effective to build, it's cost effective to ramp up the manufacturing facilities. And just like we think SpaceX learned sat to phone from us, we're going to learn from them on their manufacturing process and employ a lot of that same strategy as we ramp up our own facilities.
All right, sadly we are out of time. Thank you to everyone for sending all those questions in, and for the panel for being so generous with their time and offering us a glimpse into the fascinating world ahead for direct-to-device services. Thank you all.